Okay, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to tackle some pretty hefty claims that have been swirling around about the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and of course the origins of COVID-19. There are a lot of folks and organizations kind of caught up in the whole thing, and it can get a little overwhelming trying to sort through it all. Right, so we're going to do that for you. We're gonna break it down. We've looked at the reports. We've gone through all the analyses, and we are going to extract that core verified info and hopefully offer some clarity on all this.
Yeah, it's really something. You start digging into this, and one of the first things that really jumps out is all the misinformation, especially when it comes to who's actually running the show over at WIV. You see these claims pop up about Glaxo, Pfizer, BlackRock, Soros, even Gates. Like they're all somehow calling the shots. It's just not true.
Yeah. No, that's definitely a big one we needed to address. The WIV, it's part of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, the CAS. And their funding, it primarily comes from the Chinese government. This isn't some new thing either. It's been around since 1956. You've got Director Wang Yanyi and Party Secretary Zhao Gengfu. They're the ones leading the charge. But it's important to remember that it is a civilian research body under the CAS, right? So there have been collaborations, like with PLA scientists on certain public health initiatives, and they've even worked with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Right. And that high-security BSL-4 lab everyone talks about, that was actually built in collaboration with the French. So, yeah, there are connections, but it's not this shadowy cabal of Western entities controlling everything.
Absolutely. And it gets even more complicated when you start looking at the alleged financial ties, all the stuff about Soros, Gates, and Fauci. I mean, this whole idea that Soros and Gates somehow own the WIV through these big pharmaceutical companies like GSK and Pfizer, it just completely ignores how these companies actually work. They're independent. GSK and Pfizer even had a consumer health partnership that ended years ago.
Right. Right, and people point to BlackRock's minority stake in Pfizer, but that's not ownership. That's just a small slice of the pie.
Right.
And then you've got Soros, and his link is even more tenuous. He's got investments in BlackRock, so it's like this indirect thing. Yeah. And the Gates Foundation, they've funded some of Pfizer's manufacturing, but they don't own any stock. Now, about Dr. Fauci and that NIH funding.
Yeah. Okay. So the NIH, they did provide about $3.7 million back in 2015. And of that, something like $600,000 went to the WIV through EcoHealth Alliance. Now, this was specifically for research on bat coronaviruses. And this is important. It was about figuring out if and how they could jump to humans, not about creating new viruses. Between 2014 and 2021, over $2 million was subcontracted out for this kind of research. And I think the whole debate around gain-of-function research and what Dr. Fauci said really highlights how differently people can interpret this work.
So what's the consensus then? I mean, where does the scientific community stand on the whole COVID-19 origin story?
Well, the prevailing view is that it was a natural origin, zoonotic, most likely. Probably went from bats to some kind of intermediate animal, maybe at that Huanan seafood market in Wuhan. A lot of those early cases were linked back to that market, and they actually found the virus there, both in environmental samples and in animals.
Right, but then there's the whole lab leak theory, which people still talk about a lot.
Yeah, they do. But the thing is, there isn't a lot of solid evidence to support it, and it often gets, mixed up with all sorts of other conspiracy theories. The truth is, nobody's 100% sure. And it's interesting, even the U.S. intelligence agencies, they don't all agree. Some lean towards the lab leak, but with low confidence, while others think natural origin is more likely, and some just haven't decided. China hasn't exactly been helpful with their, lack of transparency. But there is, evidence pointing to a natural origin, like those genetic and epidemiological links to the market we talked about, the fact that they found the virus in raccoon dogs, which were being sold there, and just the fact that so many of those early cases were concentrated around the market. Oh, and remember that House subcommittee hearing. Some of the experts there actually brought up the possibility of a lab leak based on their interpretation of the scientific evidence.
Okay, let's move on to the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. Comirnaty.
Right, Comirnaty, a major collaboration there, and it uses that mRNA technology. Got early authorization, and the efficacy was really impressive, especially at first. Prevented symptomatic disease, hospitalizations, deaths. They've updated it for new variants, of course, and, when it first came out with that 90 to 95% efficacy, a lot of people were calling it a wonder, and rightfully so. The mRNA technology itself even won a Nobel Prize. But yeah, we have seen that efficacy drop a bit over time, and with the emergence of new variants, it's not quite as effective as it was initially.
And where does Bill Gates fit into all of this?
It's It's important to be clear about this. Bill Gates does not own Pfizer. He doesn't have a majority share or anything like that. Yes, his foundation has collaborated with Pfizer, and they've funded some manufacturing efforts, but that doesn't equal ownership. The Gates Foundation did buy some Pfizer stock back in 2002, but that was for a specific program, something about contraceptive access. They've also invested in other vaccine developers like BioNTech and actually made quite a bit of money from that early on. But, Gates has really shifted his focus from Microsoft to philanthropy through his foundation. They invest in all sorts of things, and they've been a major contributor to the WHO, which shows, his long-standing commitment to global health.
Okay, so last thing, let's just clarify. Who owns what when it comes to all these financial players that get brought up all the time?
All right, so we already talked about GSK and Pfizer. They're separate entities. BlackRock has that minority stake in Pfizer. Now, Winterthur, that was acquired by AXA back in 2006, and they merged it with their Swiss operations. Soros doesn't own any part of Winterthur, and Winterthur didn't build any lab in Wuhan. Allianz came along later and acquired Winterthur. Vanguard and BlackRock, they're institutional investors in Allianz, but Soros isn't a major player there either. Allianz Global Investors is their asset management arm, and it's actually Vanguard, who's the biggest institutional investor in BlackRock. It's all very, very intertwined, It's not as simple as some of these conspiracy theories make it seem. Oh, and about the WHO, they get funding from member state contributions, but also from voluntary contributions from all sorts of places, including member states and organizations like the Gates Foundation. The U.S. has historically been a big donor, but voluntary contributions are becoming a bigger part of their funding, which, that can influence what the WHO focuses on.
So, if we had to boil it all down, it seems like a lot of the claims out there about the WIV, about how COVID-19 started, about all these players, they don't hold up when you look at the evidence.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be critical, to really look at the information and where it's coming from. It's complicated stuff.
It is. It is.
And it makes you think, with all this global health funding going around and all these different interests, public and private, it's worth asking, how does that affect what kind of research gets done, and how prepared are we really for the next big health crisis? Just something to think about.
Yeah, good point. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, welcome.